dachte ich mir, die musste mal anrufen. So.
Ja. Sure, I have several questions I would like to ask you, so I will just quickly take out my phone and read them to you. I really can't seem to remember that at all. I also think it's wonderful that I have the opportunity to ask you everything today. I'm sure it's fascinating for you as well. So, to start with the first question, can you tell me what your very first knife was?
My very first knife, you ask, huh? In fact, I have a really vivid and clear memory of that moment. It was undoubtedly connected to the entire theme of Rambo First Blood. It took place in the year 1983. Naturally, I'd been fascinated by knives and related items even before then, but indeed, for some reason, I never really owned one. But naturally, after I saw Rambo First Blood, I definitely wanted to have a comparable knife. At that time, it simply didn't exist. It just didn't exist in Germany. However, there was a company from Solingen that indeed brought out what was considered, for that era, to be a remarkably cool and stylish survival knife, which was then aptly named a survival knife. And that was from the company Schlieper, which has long been out of business, a Solingen company.
Don't got it. Nah, well.
You see, it's a widely recognized and established company hailing from Solingen. Their iconic and distinctive emblem was a sun that featured an eye on it. That's why they were called iBrand. So the Americans don't know them as Schlieper, but they know them as iBrand. And back in those days, they indeed actually did. Most likely inspired by the famous Rambo movie, they went ahead and developed a survival knife. What? Yeah, generally speaking, it indeed possessed the very features that the Jimmy Lyle knife is known to have. It featured a hollow handle design, although at that time it wasn't made of metal, but instead had a molded plastic grip. Inside this grip, there was a well-concealed brass tube, like an inner brass rod, equipped with a brass end cap for secure closure. And it also sported a protective brass handguard. Brass was just the material used back then, for hand protection and for small details. And the blade also had a sawback. However, not like the sawback we're familiar with from Jimmy Lyle's First Blood knife, but rather a finely toothed sawback, with which you could somewhat manage to saw, so it certainly wasn't in any way considered to be a truly functional saw at all. But it essentially had all the Rambo features that we were familiar with from the Rambo movie. It came equipped with the sawback feature, and it certainly had a hollow handle, although it noticeably did not include a compass. That was added separately later. It had a leather sheath with a sharpening stone attached on the front. Of course, this knife wasn't as large as the 9-inch loaner knife that we have here for comparison. In reality, I still own that particular knife to this very day. Yes, indeed. Quite sadly, the leather sheath eventually tore at some point in time. I had a custom Kydex sheath crafted for that particular knife. However, in fact, this knife still exists.
Nevertheless, it really is that good. Yes, exactly. That is absolutely correct.
And that was indeed my very first knife I had ever owned. And during that time period, at least, it really was essentially the best item you could possibly have. That was just something that was achievable in Germany for someone who went to school and was 16 years old. Yes, but those were different times. Those were different times. Those were different times. And there honestly wasn't all that extensive of a selection available, like the options we have today. These days, you naturally have an extensive selection of knives in any imaginable price range and all sorts of quality worldwide. You'd simply Google it and find it quite easily. However, back in the year 1983, having such access wasn't really possible. You really had to check the Deutsche Waffen Journal or similar magazines to successfully find those addresses. And back then, there were still plenty of those weapon shops around, which you hardly see anymore these days. Lots and lots have gone extinct. There are very few left now, and they existed back then, and those were basically the go-to places. Those were the spots where you could ask questions, and ideally they could help you because they had addresses in Solingen and such things. And yes, unfortunately the brand no longer exists, Schlieper. But the knife back in the day, it was, of course, something cool.
Anything for you today?
Yeah, it's always something special because I still own it to this day. And naturally, it serves as a cherished keepsake for me from that era and from all the things we used to have back then.
So up next I have, and this is something that really grabs my interest a lot, and probably it will catch your interest too. What was it like for you the very first time you met Sylvester Stallone in person? I mean, before that, you only knew him from the movies. You had your cutouts and posters of him, and then suddenly Sly himself was standing right there in front of you. When exactly did that all take place?
Yes, exactly. So how did this entire situation come about? In 2013. The information came out that Sly was in Bulgaria filming Expendables 3, and I believe the second installment had just been released. However, I'm not really all that sure anymore. And the Expendables 1 through 3 were filmed consecutively, one after the other, in rapid succession. And well, anyway, we basically got word that Sylvester Stallone is currently in Bulgaria. And by that point, it was clear to me that if there was any real chance to reach him, it definitely had to be in Bulgaria. Any option in Hollywood was completely out of the question. And Bulgaria? Where time ticks a little differently, and the people are still different, I thought, this is the perfect opportunity to get close to him. And well, anyway, I was already out with Pohl Force, and we actually had a business partner in Sofia, in Bulgaria. We approached him and asked, we casually said, hey, listen up. There is always someone who ends up knowing someone else around there. Yes, and he mentioned that he actually got a new job. Anyway, the business partner did try initially, but unfortunately wasn't all that successful. They knew which hotel he was in. It was the Kaminsky Hotel back then. But somehow it didn't progress until the CEO of the partner company then said, I will take care of it, and came from Germany. And it turned out that he was essentially exercising at the very same studio in this Hotel Kaminsky, where Sly always habitually conducts his workout sessions. The trainer working with the business partner was also Sly's, providing expert guidance and comprehensive support throughout their workout sessions. That's how the world goes round. That's how the world goes round. Yeah, and then I went ahead and asked him, I said, would you be potentially willing to perhaps approach Stallone on my behalf? And he told me, I'll go ahead and get it for you. I then handed over to him some nice knives and a book of mine, which was signed by me personally. And yes, he actually handed it over to him at the local gym. I even have a photograph of it. Exactly. And back then he gave him a black Foxtrot 1. The first we built back then with our partner Lion Steel, he handed over to him. Together with one of our detailed catalogs, it obviously left a good impression. And then the one after that, which was most likely on a weekend, and on that Monday, just like anyone would dream of, all around the world, Hollywood actually calls me up. So it was Hollywood from Bulgaria, and then I had there, on the phone was the prop master, who was actually the head of props for the entire film. And a fellow German, Dirk Buchmann, has now become a dear, good friend of mine over time. And yes, he mentioned that, Sly would really love to have the opportunity to meet you in that particular context. I even mentioned that I might possibly be working on an exciting new book project about knives featured in films. And Sly was truly willing to meet with me in person. I should definitely get myself a plane ticket right away. So, and now.
For you, it was a moment, yes, you must picture that.
Then he called us at the company and was utterly flabbergasted, just as one might anticipate. And after I carefully hung up the phone, I indulged in a joyful little celebratory dance right here. And, well, anyway, My assistant and I ended up purchasing some plane tickets, and quite incredibly, 3 days later, we were already in Sofia. And yeah, it probably had to happen that quickly because Stallone reportedly only had a really short slot left where he was filming. And then on the weekend, which further explains why we had to come so quickly, he was going to leave Sofia once again, since he was planning to head to Betten by plane, where he had a guest spot on Wetten Das. Oh, that's great. Exactly, right. Yes, he made a guest appearance on Wetten Das. Consequently, we really had such limited time and needed to rush in order to meet with him. And well, how was it then? So, the first time I actually saw him was at the hotel. And my assistant Sebastian and I were just sitting down to have breakfast. And yeah. Then all of a sudden, a whole group of bodyguards walked in, and they positioned themselves strategically around the exit, or possibly the entrance, however you like. And yes, then Sylvester Stallone marched in, wearing a tracksuit, and just stood in line, which I found totally cool at that moment, until a chef somehow made him an omelette. So he didn't have any VIP treatment, and somehow everyone just stepped aside and allowed him to pass through. No, so he lined up behind us, just like the rest of us, and, well, at that moment I turned to my assistant Sebastian and said, "Should I go over now?" And we actually agreed that no, it would be better to be formally introduced, and yes, so then. We made our way over to the Boyaner studios, and it was there that we met for the very first time my now new friend Dirk Buchmann, who greeted us warmly. He said, "Okay, come along with me. I'll personally take you to the studio." And once we were inside the studio, I think it was studio number 6 or something like that, they call it. It's the biggest one they have there, with lots of green screen and other stuff. And there they had constructed a mock-up airplane. They constructed an entire airplane fuselage specifically for filming a scene featuring Sly, alongside another actor whose name escapes me at the moment, but in Expendables 3, Barney Ross is faced with a significant challenge that really enhances the story's dynamic. Organizer, leader, or however you want to put it, is tasked with taking on this important assignment here. Bearded gentleman, also known from various films in supporting roles, and he's currently shooting a scene with him in the airplane. Well, anyway. There he stood once more. The very best of the lawn. Just like that, effortlessly. And I'll absolutely never forget. Sly actually had a personal dresser during the filming of Expendables 3. A personal dresser. And the personal dresser really looked a bit as if he'd sprung right out of the late 80s. He was sporting curly gelled hair and really had a distinctly Mediterranean look. And he happened to be wearing on his outstretched arm, he had a shirt from Sly, which he always carried behind him on an outstretched arm for the moment when Sly needed to change his shirt. And, well, anyway, then my friend over here, Dirk, said to me, "All right, I'm going to introduce you all now." And then Sly had just finished shooting the scene, and I approached him, and he looked at me intently, and how should I put it? It really felt kind of like being inside a movie, because Sly, when meeting new people, at least it was like that with me. He acted a bit like Rocky. Well, he didn't instantly look at me, not directly into the eyes, but rather cast his eyes downward first, and then gradually glanced up from the corner of his eye. And it really felt like it was straight out of a movie. It was so surreal, that moment. Yeah, and he asked me directly as the first question, like, "Hey, where do you guys make your knives?" And so he immediately got into the conversation, and yeah, he had completed the scene inside the airplane and was now preparing for the upcoming next scene, which would be filmed outside. And she changes sets, and then he tells me, "Oh, you know what, join us." And then we both set off on our journey. And throughout the entire time, he was essentially recounting to me the details about the variety of knives, beginning with the very first Rambo 1 knife. He spoke about Jimmy Lyle, elaborating on the immense amount of effort he invested into perfecting even the tiniest details with the screwdrivers and other elements. It was really nice. Yeah, so Pretty cool. And then we were walking along. Unfortunately, there is a recording. A recording was made that sadly no longer exists. My friend Dirk Buchmann was filming us as we walked. But unfortunately, the footage somehow doesn't exist anymore. I would have liked that today, of course. And what was really funny, the story I always like to tell, is while Sly and I were walking side by side and we were talking, he is a little bit shorter than I am. Furthermore, Sly has his own unique and distinctive way of walking. So he's got this particular Rocky Rambo style. He definitely walks in a very distinctive and uniquely characteristic way. And this walking, it sets a certain pace. So that means I was basically walking alongside him, and at a certain point, I realized that I was walking just like him. Yeah. But it wasn't because I actually wanted to imitate him. It was more because he naturally ran at a certain pace. I noticed I was actually moving like Sylvester Stallone. After that, we had a chat. And that was genuinely quite amusing, I must say. And then he eventually arrived at the filming location where in Expendables 3 there's this epic ultimate fight scene. And quite interestingly enough, it was originally a Rome set that had been completely transformed. Yeah, you basically recycle the sets. It definitely makes sense in a place like Hollywood or Bulgaria would, or whatever name you prefer to call it. And anyway, he truly impressed me at that moment, not just with everything he shared, but because I found it genuinely fascinating and deeply intriguing. Still, it was challenging to ask any questions, as he thoroughly enjoys delivering long monologues. At a certain point, he finally loosens up, and then it also naturally gets more conversational. What I found to be truly cool was the moment when he suddenly said, "Why don't we take some pictures together?" I said, "Okay." He came up to us, "Let's take photos." Not the other way around, so I didn't ask him. And what I particularly liked was, that's so typical Hollywood. He turned around first to check how the background looked. And I thought, actually they're just photos for me. But he emphasized that the background should be authentic or look good in some way. And that really impressed me. He also later, I'll gladly share more about it, truly impressed me again during the last filming section of Rambo: Last Blood with his professionalism. So he really is a professional, and I liked that very, very much. And then we also touched on various topics. We didn't just talk about knives, because I'm really into watches too. We talked about watches, and that was really very, very nice. And ultimately, when the conversation finally came to an end, and he mentioned that he really needed to return to his work duties now, my prop master friend turned to me and said, he remarked, "Dietmar, you can genuinely give yourself a pat on the back now." I ask, "For what exactly?" Says Sly, generally, when someone approaches him and starts conversing with him about some topic or whatever. Talk time was limited to 15 minutes. He said, "You've been chatting for an hour now." And he hadn't been bored. He says, "That's a compliment for you." He usually doesn't do that. I say, "Oh, thank you. That was, of course, a huge compliment." Dude.
But that's definitely teamwork. Yes, absolutely. With watches involved, yes, indeed.
Yes, indeed. We had so many interesting topics that we kept coming back to repeatedly. And that was honestly really quite outstanding. I need to say it once again. And so he demonstrated once more. Yeah, I mean, those were all pieces of information. You have to understand that these are first-hand information straight from the source. The individual who utilized these things, who conceived these items, wanted them for the film and what he thought about them and so forth. You simply can't find that information in any book. He explained it to me. Looking back later on, we regretted it, but to tell the truth, we weren't really fully aware or quite sure about it at the time. How we should behave as we go forward. Etiquette-wise, is it okay if we keep a recording device running? Is that something that might not be perceived well by others? And that's why we were very, very cautious with what we decided to do, and then we said, okay, let's proceed. We're really restraining ourselves and only doing precisely what they permit us to do, nothing more. Since we didn't want to leave a bad impression.
Initially not impose.
Yes, that's the reason, no. So we took it in that manner and behaved professionally. And what I genuinely liked very much indeed, and what still to this very day fundamentally defines my relationship with him. We truly communicated on equal terms, and that was definitely what I appreciated the most. That was truly the greatest compliment for me. It demonstrated a profound respect extended towards me as well. And I thought it was really quite great that he wasn't all high and mighty like some big Hollywood star or anything like that.
Not at all.
Not at all. Truly, that entire experience was absolutely amazing. And indeed, that was truly my very first ever meetup with Sylvester Stone.
Lovely story. All right, let's proceed to the next question. What would you personally consider to be your all-time favorite knife?
From the Rambo series?
If it isn't the Rambo knife, then yes, most certainly. However, if that's indeed the case, then probably yes. I can already pick up on it. So which Rambo knife would you say is your favorite one?
Absolutely. My initial choice would definitely have to be to mention my own creation, the Heartstopper. I really, sincerely like the knife quite a lot. And also the concept that stands behind it. However, certainly, if I am to genuinely honor the truth as it is, then of course, the Jimmy Lyle First Blood knife is undeniably the knife that deeply influenced me the most and left the most significant lasting impression on me. So I have to say again and again, this is the knife. The standard for everything that followed, even of my own making, this is the standard. And what many people really tend to underestimate, we have to transport ourselves back to the time when Jimmy Lyle crafted and developed this iconic knife in 1981. That was long before CNC, milling machines, grinding machines, and all those sorts of technologies existed. And also when it comes to the design. The knife was so advanced and ahead of its time that even today it unquestionably remains an undeniably timeless and classic piece. Just like a Porsche 911 is always seen as a timeless classic, this knife stays. Well, truly untouchable even today. This is truly the knife that set the standard in the industry. And for me personally, as a designer and knife expert, it was always the foundational anchor. It served as the essential basis on which I developed and refined my ideas and philosophies surrounding tactical deployment knives, as well as film knives, consistently using this knife as my standard and inspiration. And therefore, if you're asking about my personal knife, which I find great, then indeed it's really the Heartstopper, the MK9, or also the Force one. This is the massive folding knife that I personally designed and developed. It still holds the place as my absolute favorite of all time.
Yes, very nice. And what people are probably very interested in now, and I am too, although I already know it, but for you once more, do you have the First Blood knife at home? Do you have that in your collection?
Exactly, that's always a kind of delicate topic, about which collectors either openly discuss or usually tend not to like talking about so much. I'm generally more the type of collector who would say, all right, my closest circle of friends is more than welcome to come and see the collection and experience the stuff firsthand. Throughout the many decades that I've been actively collecting various items, including movie knives, there's actually a very, very restricted and limited circle of people that I've allowed into this world of mine. Those who have ever laid eyes on this collection. But yes, I can indeed say I'm one of the 13 people on this planet who own one of the original Jimmy Lyle First Blood. One of those 13 rare pieces.
That's truly pretty amazing, wow.
Yeah, and it was also quite a memorable and special moment for me when I received that back then. And naturally, I also waited for quite a significant amount of time until the opportunity eventually presented itself to me. Interestingly enough, back in those days, it was even offered to me through the famous Lyle knives. Jimmy Lyle was, sadly, already deceased by then. However, his loyal former secretary and devoted widow took over the operations to keep Lyle Knives running, successfully managing the business for quite some time. And so there were always points of contact afterwards, and then at some point, I asked the question like, couldn't you maybe somehow help me after all? Isn't there someone you know who might be able to assist me with this? Because I was already aware that the initial 6 knives were allocated to the film team at Haupt, and afterwards the series starting from number 7 all the way up to 13 were released for general sale to the public. By the way, number 13 was Jimmy Lyle's lucky number. He had that one first. Yes, exactly, that's why he made 13. So the lucky number. That's why there are 13 knives. And he genuinely only sold the other items to his really close friends. Ultimately, one of these close friends made the decision to part with it, and with Lyle's assistance brought it to my attention and offered it to me explicitly. And then back at that time, I decided to purchase it. That was all the way in the year 1993. It's now been in my personal possession for more than 30 long years. Yes, it truly remains. Always something special indeed.
Something truly special. The first knife also has that, exactly.
Exactly. It all comes full circle. As it often does with me, a circle comes together again. And so, essentially, the circle has come full circle. And maybe just one more sentence.
You often find him again. Yes, you do find him.
That's how it is. The Americans say, full circle. And it truly is. There are really things that happened in my life. And I know you will touch upon that later, here on the main event. But these are truly things that, for me personally, have always come full circle in life. And that was simply one of those things. Then what had impacted me so profoundly, what had impressed me greatly, eventually became mine as well.
So, if I were to think about it, owning this knife would be like holding a real piece of history. Yes!
For me, it's definitely history. For me, indeed, it's history. Not just film history as a whole, but also my own personal history. And someone once inquired of me, which would be the very last knife you would be willing to sell. Got it.
Out of all the movies in the Rambo series, which one would you say stands out as your favorite? Is there a particular installment you enjoy the most?
I would definitely say it's the one part where I had the opportunity to contribute my work and efforts. Certainly, it truly did demand an immense and extraordinary amount of heartfelt effort and dedication, in the most literal sense. The movie, along with all the intense work and stress, should be noted as well. Nevertheless, despite all that, we are actually back to where we started initially. First Blood, the very first part, was indeed the one that truly captivated me as a teenager when I was around 16 years old, where as a 16-year-old, you find yourself not really knowing where you stand, where you want to head, where you're just uncertain and lack any real plan for where you want to go in life, but still so disoriented. But then that was like a momentum, a film, that left such a lasting impression on me, that influenced me so profoundly that I have to say, First Blood will always stand as my top and favorite choice of Rambo movie. And after experiencing the actual locations in person, it will definitely continue to remain that way. But you'll get to that later.
Yes, that's right. And considering we're already talking about the Rambo movies, which one would you say you consider to be the least impressive or perhaps the worst in your opinion? So if we say from 1 to 5, can you say it like that or not at all?
That is quite a tricky question.
I get asked that all the time. I can talk about you, for instance. A lot of people always ask me, like, which movie do you think is the best and which one is the worst? And I feel exactly the same way you do. So First Blood is absolutely my number one as well. There's really nothing that can top that in any way. And that's how it all started. And I don't know, this film is just so authentic. Everything fits together perfectly well. For me, it continues just like the film series, beginning with 2, moving to 3, then progressing to 4, and at last reaching 5.
Now you have to parts.
Yes, it's not so easy. No.
Is really not quite that easy. Parts 4 and 5 are, of course, films that were produced in a considerably later era and also within a different cultural spirit of the times, which must be clearly conveyed. The films numbered 1 to 3 that you just brought up were shot between the years 1982 and 1988, which indicates they were created over a time span of basically 6 years. And they distinctly mirrored a different spirit from that era. It was truly something.
That's a certain kind of chess. Yeah,
That was just all... Yeah, it all initially kicked off with Rambo 1. We've had discussions about this before, numerous times, pointing out that Rambo 1 actually paved the way for the creation of an entirely new and distinctive cinematic genre. That. Only a small number of people are aware or become conscious that it truly was indeed First Blood. That this genre of, let's say, muscle-bound fighters equipped with heavy weapons and combat knives who fend off an overwhelming force of enemies. It all essentially had its initial beginnings with First Blood, and that particular movie...
Where the knife is such a prominent feature, it's absolutely incredible.
Exactly. Back in the 50s, there was actually a movie that was made here, and it was called The Iron Mistress, featuring the actors Alan Ladd and Virginia Mayo. It revolved around the story of Jim Bowie concerning the Bowie knife. However, when it comes to more recent history, such films simply did not exist. Then it honestly started to significantly gain some traction with First Blood.
For many enthusiasts, I must say, it truly marked the start of collecting knives, right? That you make such a knife the focus in a film, making people say, wow, I need it too, right?
Exactly. However, to ultimately provide a more detailed answer to your question, in reality, what I truly liked the very least was actually, if I'm not mistaken, genuinely the fourth part, because... So the story was... I don't know now, it was repeated, he rescued someone and so on. So it was actually a story that repeated itself for the third time. In Rambo 2, he frees the prisoners of war. In Rambo 3, it's Troutman who gets rescued. And in Rambo 4, it's the missionaries being saved. It was essentially the same thing. And what I really didn't like the least, of course, was definitely the knife that was included in there, if one had to put the knife into words. So actually, out of all the elements that were coming together to create that mix, that was the particular film where I found myself saying, this is the one I definitely like the least out of everything. But I don't think I'm stepping on anyone's toes here when I say that. Absolutely.
Many people indeed have that. And it, of course, also embodies a certain brutality. Yeah, the first one didn't spread that at all. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. And that was always consistently the thing which, when everything was said and done, also managed to... In the end, it gradually drove me further and further away from the Rambo series, prioritizing excessive violence over a compelling and substantive storyline. I found this sincerely disappointing, to be absolutely honest. That unique aspect profoundly captivated and endlessly fascinated me about the very first Rambo film. It genuinely had a plot grounded in reality in the sense that, once you put it on, it immediately engages and draws you in. PIT, Special Forces. And those units, which were essentially shunned by and marginalized within American society, and all the subsequent portrayals, have at times even been described by some critics as merely vanity projects and pure entertainment. The focus tended to shift continuously towards the target of current relevance, and thus films were nearly always oriented towards whoever was depicted as the villain at that particular time. Yeah. The Russians were depicted as villains on 2 occasions, and currently the narrative is shifting its focus towards Miramar. I'm not really sure about it. That's why nothing really comes close to the first part. I genuinely like the first part so much because the protagonist is not this overly cool and calculated hero who always knows exactly what he's doing and what's coming next. He's more relatable and doesn't carry that typical hero aura. And running around with the machine gun and shooting everywhere and that. But in the first part, he escapes through the woods, just like we are here now, and he's exhausted. Or one of the scenes right here where I then think, you simply don't find anything like that in all the other parts anymore. Rambo is hanging on the cliffs, and Golt in the helicopter is shooting at him. And there's a very particular scene where he's hanging there, and he's shooting at him. And Rambo glances downward with intensity, genuinely tense and urgently trying to figure out where he can securely hold on to, and where he is supposed to climb next. Panic-stricken. And you don't really see that in all the other parts anymore. There, he's the calculated, cool fighter with the machine gun and bandolier in hand. I missed that a bit.
And, I personally find it genuinely unfortunate, for instance, that Rambo is so often frequently portrayed like that.
Yes, he certainly did indeed. He just guided the Rambo character in a completely different direction in the subsequent installments. There was the calculated, composed fighter, the merciless killer, who just brutally and ruthlessly slaughters everyone in his path. And that's really what I found so appealing about the first part, that the sole person who met their demise was the sheriff, who was quite foolish enough to unbuckle his seatbelt and subsequently plummeted out of the helicopter. And he injured everyone else, with some of them likely quite severely hurt, but it wasn't entirely about killing. And so, this particular storyline, or the central plot which defines the movie First Blood, it's truly something unique and special. I feel the same way too.
It's really also quite comparable. As we're on the topic of films, do you have a personal favorite quote from one of the Rambo movies? Or maybe a line that really strikes you as the very best, something that always...
Yes, that's exactly it. Indeed. Essentially the one that we consistently make regular use of too. And just recently, when I found myself back in Hope once more, I was loudly yelled at as I had the wonderful chance to take a short, exhilarating spin with the Rambo stunt bike here. Yeah, complete insanity, and nothing is ever truly over. So that's, of course, the ultimate legendary saying. Of course, there are others from the entire film series.
Because that's already a captivating scene where he says, yes, exactly. You really have to say that. Absolutely, that truly touched me. Even now, when I watch that scene, I really think about how he breaks down in front of Colonel Troutman, that he...
It is such a profound emotional moment where it truly seems he genuinely feels. You will most certainly encounter that in the other parts as well. Particularly noticeable in the second one, where he... Somewhat in this particular scene, Kobao is shedding tears right here because she was just shot.
Yes, but that's just a small token of love. Yes, of course, sure, no question.
Absolutely no doubt about that. However, it just wasn't entirely the same, as you previously pointed out, especially in First Blood, when he experiences a profound emotional breakdown. So that's also such defining scenes, you know. And there's this nothing is over. That's definitely already quite a significantly meaningful statement as it stands. During the event held here to commemorate 40 years, it served as the primary slogan of the whole solar choice.
But since you just mentioned it, the 40th anniversary, I've actually been curious and have a specific question in mind about that topic, so we could continue directly into discussing it. Recently, you attended the 40th anniversary in Hope. How did you find the whole experience there? And was it truly your very first time ever visiting that place? Or were you there before? No.
No, I had never previously had the opportunity to visit Canada either, and yes, I eventually managed to make the trip there. It was through the kind and gracious invitation from the festival committee, who reached out with a thoughtful inquiry to see if I might be interested in the opportunity of joining as a VIP guest during their much-anticipated celebrations. And I, of course, embraced it infinitely gladly. And who would have? Sure. And I have to say, speaking honestly, on my personal bucket list of experiences I really want to have had, it was always a significant wish that I wanted to someday find myself visiting Hope. I want to come along too. Exactly. And you will? Yes, you will, as I promised you earlier. And yeah. And that was, of course, then the absolutely perfect opportunity to simply say, okay, then let's go ahead and do it. And I certainly engage in this task with genuine conviction and deep dedication. And naturally, it worked out that on this particular occasion, since I'm already there, and knowing it's one of your most burning questions, I'll go ahead and answer it directly, referring to the method in which I tackle the searches for subjects and anticipate the routes. And I, of course, thought to myself, if I'm going to be at that unique anniversary event, then you definitely need to bring along something really nice for all the people attending. You have to give people something for this event. And, by the way, no one else did it. All right, Jimmy Lai is unfortunately no longer alive. The Hibben family didn't take any action, and absolutely none of them were present on site either. And so I thought, I have to bring something for the people, the fans. I have to bring you something. But it truly needs to be something that fundamentally also connects the diverse elements. From the very first part, where everything originally took shape approximately 40 years ago, with the unique design elements that I have personally crafted myself. Then it's basically been years, 36 years on. And yes, I would really like to now introduce you to this knife in detail.
Absolutely, Dietmar. You've designed something genuinely unique and special solely for this event. You already have it here with you. Could you perhaps share a bit more detailed information about it with us?
Sure, gladly. So, as I said earlier, I didn't want to turn up empty-handed. And of course, on the special occasion of this memorable event, which marks a significant milestone of 40 years, I was genuinely eager and excited to create something truly special that naturally and directly links back to the very essence of the first part. As we now know, I have developed the knife, or knives for the last part, for the fifth part. And it should now become somewhat of an important symbolic bridge between the significant and memorable event of the very first part. All the while, quite naturally, it also serves as a kind of homage, a heartfelt tribute to the great and legendary Jimmy Lyle, for what he developed and what has profoundly shaped me. But at the same time, of course, not to overlook my own roots. And so, the idea naturally arose to build upon the MK9, the Heartstopper, by saying, we'll use the Heartstopper as a fundamental base and then make an effort to connect these two worlds with each other seamlessly. Honestly, at the very beginning, the plan sounded quite simple, but when I sat in front of that blank sheet of paper, it was actually challenging. Naturally, there are also specific significant elements present on the first blood knife that we are familiar with. Saw teeth, screwdriver, hollow handle, and so on. But how should I integrate them now? Therefore, the task was to articulate that I would not produce an imitation of Jimmy Lyle, but instead incorporate these fundamental aspects of his renowned design into mine. And at that moment, we took the Heartstopper. From the MK9, which is purely a combat knife, you have to say, it's just like this, I don't want to sugarcoat it. We made a survival knife out of it. Very cool. And I'm going to show you right now how it looks. And indeed, we really did have a Kydex sheath included with us. That was unquestionably my primary choice right from the very start, where I stated, okay, as someone who is truly dedicated to crafting realistic knives, and there goes a military helicopter flying overhead, perfectly fitting naturally here into our film take. Very good job. A big thanks to the Bundeswehr and a little shout out to all the hardworking members of the Air Force, and thank you very much, dear comrades. So Kydex was definitely our first choice when it truly comes down to knives that possess a real operational purpose, that are genuinely intended for practical use in the field and not just for collections. That's precisely why I often choose Kydex as my main choice, even though many people, including you, value leather sheaths for the unique qualities and attributes they bring. Completely different character, one must say.
Kydex is clearly durable and consistently reliable without a doubt.
We don't really even need to discuss that. The durability, the robustness, and a sheath like Kydex can get completely soaking wet without any issues. And it still maintains its appearance, continuing to function. A leather sheath, once it's thoroughly soaked, tends to lose its shape, and it changes color. Doesn't look nice at the end. You can, of course, grease it. But at the end of the day, as I said, when it really comes to developing something that also has a real practical benefit, then Kydex is always the first choice, and it also comes in sheets in various colors.
Absolutely correct.
Yes, I did have them with me, and my Spanish partner, actually. Managed to build them here at the very last possible second. I'd say at the last second, it was all like, great.
So before the release? Yes, definitely.
So before we actually flew to Canada, at the very last second, with just one prototype sheath. And yes, the same definitely also applied to the knife, of course.
And here's the absolutely amazing piece. It truly is beautifully straightforward. Yes?
As evident, and it's tough to spot. I will now dive into details. You can recognize the basic shape, at least from the handle and also from the blade length, also from the handle end. From the pivot screws. That's all. MK9 hardstock. And now the challenge was to figure out how to integrate the remaining elements. And we originally had a back on the hard stopper, which also essentially has an internal radius. It had to be removed, of course, so that we could achieve a straight back saw, allowing us to make cleaner and more precise cuts. The back saw. And in this situation, I really had to stick very closely to the precise requirements that a typical enthusiast of the First Blood movie knife would have in their expectations. It must, of course, have exactly the same number of saw teeth as the First Blood knife. No question about it.
Then E?
Yeah, exactly. I needed to...
But I also counted it right away. Yes?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I didn't know. That's exactly what I knew would happen. And interestingly enough, my manufacturing partner, Lion Steel, when I had given them the necessary specifications, actually went ahead and built in one saw tooth too few. So constructive. And I said, that's just not on. An absolute no-go. I know what kind of backlash happens if I don't remember the exact number of saw teeth. That had to. Well, had to. It was a must. There was no other way. That most definitely had to be included without fail. And yes, the subsequent thing that naturally came up was that the machete, the First Blood, had on one hand. On the upper part, there is a Phillips screwdriver, and on the lower part, you'll find a flathead screwdriver. So that also had to be included eventually. And now it was essentially like, all right, we made the decision not to integrate any additional handguard in its design, just like the one we have here with the hardstopper model. But we wanted the design of the knife to be as simple as possible so that the weight remains as low as possible, because one of the things, the first thing you noticed and what everyone remarks, he picks it up and says, this is so light.
Exactly. Yes, you are exactly right.
And that's also what I wanted to point out. Again, the connection to reality here. If someone genuinely intended to carry such a large item around, they'd naturally opt for something that would not end up pulling their pants down.
I just jokingly mentioned it with the Rambo 3 knife. No one could carry that around. No.
The thing is a big, heavy chunk. And here, the weight reduction comes partially from the fact that we don't have the extra handguard, which is attached separately and has its own weight, but also because we have essentially ground everything down into a thoroughly conical shape. You need to do that. If you're using a back saw and want it to cut freely, it must saw without hindrance. So in that sense, we need this conical taper going downwards in both directions. Then, of course, it also has a hollow handle. Inside, we know, I won't unscrew it now, but we both know, and most who have held the knife do too, when you remove the grip panels, a hollow compartment is revealed underneath. Much like the Lyle Messer, it was designed for closing at the back. However, at the end of the day, when you take a close look at adding up the cubic centimeters, there's actually more room here than in the hollow handle of the Lyle knife holder. Yes, it's in the map. And yes, the screwdrivers had to be integrated. Therefore, with the full tank construction, we made the decision to take out the screwdrivers for a better design.
What a good idea. That's not bad at all.
And what I did then was here, there are the openings here for the straps, where you can also basically do a block and other things. I essentially reversed them. And accordingly, you now had the opportunity to have all the same functionalities and features that you would normally find on the additional component integrated. I successfully managed to seamlessly incorporate these fully into this particular ERL section right here. Thus, the defining and characteristic design elements that characterize the First Blood knife are completely integrated into this particular version here. But at the same time, It retains its own dynamics, its own character, and its own spirit. And accordingly, right here, just in front of us, now if you will, an incredibly fascinating and utterly captivating symbiosis of the two knives has beautifully emerged and taken form. Certainly, the essence and spirit of Jimmy Lyle's from the years 1981 and 1982 have been thoughtfully transferred and skillfully transformed into a modern design of 2022. Yes. We essentially managed to achieve that, and I did indeed carry this knife with me exactly as you see it here, complete with G10 scales and the Kydex sheath. And, yeah. To be honest, at that time, I really wanted to have a green handle too, which we eventually managed to incorporate. The green handle, which again matches analogously with the green wrapping of the First Blood knife, and only, as it usually goes with prototypes, they get wrapped up at the very last second. You're missing the materials, or something just doesn't function properly. Well, I was genuinely grateful that we even had something in hand that we could showcase, something we were able to present. And it was also warmly welcomed with a big hello, and we presented exactly the same performance, just like we did in Hope, once again at the beginning of this year due to numerous requests. Regardless of the fact that we also had black and green handles, we have a total series of 600, which we split into two sets of 300, with green handles and with black handles. We subsequently complemented the knife. Also due to numerous requests from customers brought to our attention, with an additional feature of a leather sheath. Yes.
A very special one, yes. Indeed.
In this instance, I made another attempt to creatively blend and merge two distinct stylistic elements from two different films, bringing them together in a harmonious and intriguing combination. So the sheath, in its original basic form, is exactly the same one we used in Rambo Last Blood. I would like a version like the one in First Blood, with a whetstone securely and conveniently attached to the front for easy access. The sharpening stone, at that particular moment, I felt, wasn't quite suitable for precisely this specific knife. For the simple reason that maybe you'd like to hold it up to the camera once more, as the blade features this recurve curve down here. So this bow that curves inward is the recurve bow, and here is the belly. And when working with a flat sharpening stone, it is of course definitely not at all straightforward to precisely replicate this particular shape. So, and there we have the significant advantage, because with the ESLab sharpener we have here, which by the way is also prominently featured on the sheath in Rambo 2, and was first introduced to the public there, I am definitely also a really big fan of it. I genuinely like the ESLabs quite a lot, because they are not only very compact, but also incredibly effective as diamond sharpeners, if you proceed to assemble it properly. Of course, because of its round design, it quite naturally becomes especially suitable for the recurve bow. A sharpening stone is significantly better than a square sharpening stone would be. That's precisely why I decided to take a daring leap forward. There's also a connection to Rambo, particularly in the film Rambo 2. I take this specific stylistic element from Rambo 2 and integrate it into the legacy's essence, ensuring harmony with the theme. By employing this approach, we end up with more than just elements like the unique sawtooth design or screwdrivers, each fulfilling its specific role effectively within the broader scheme. From First Blood, but also from Rambo 2. And that's where we basically put all the elements together. And yes, the series was so successful, I must say, that it is now practically sold out except for a few pieces. What's currently still available is this unique combination featuring the G10 handle alongside the brown leather sheath. The Hope Prototype Edition, which we made with special attention, then came with the Kydex sheath. They're all gone now, so we didn't have many, only made 100 pieces. They really went through them quite quickly in no time. And from there, we do still have some inventory remaining, but there isn't much left at all. And then the series is essentially wrapped up in that way. And then I've brought something else interesting for you as well, which is indeed also a first. You've got the bag placed on the opposite side.
I haven't spotted it yet.
It's just the fact that we even wanted to approach it for this series in the same way that Jimmy Lyle had done. 13 isn't really my lucky number at all. But this one of 13 is such an essential and fundamental part of the iconic Rambo knife culture that we decided that we're going to do it too. And so we said, let's make something really special out of the first 13 pieces. And yes, we then made the decision that we would actually do it in a fashion that's similar to what was seen in Rambo 2 by producing the Legacy in all black.
Whoa!
How cool. But we're keeping the brown leather design. I like that so much. The contrast is great.
You can really see that quite nicely here.
Yes, and that's the reason we're also going to make the sharpener black so that it fits in perfectly. The push button was originally black anyway.
And many aren't involved, so that's always a point of criticism, or even regarding the little screws, if it doesn't quite fit right.
That's so true.
Nice.
Thus, this is definitely going to become a part of a total of 13.
Incredibly, breathtakingly lovely. This is genuinely quite beautiful, indeed, truly. And D2? No.
No, the D2 is indeed not the one we used this time around. That was simply the initial prototype that we created because we happened to have the necessary type of steel available at that particular moment. No, it will of course also be near-lock steel, just like all the others. Yes, of course. That was merely a prototype for now. In my opinion, it's already coming across as really impressive and quite great.
Absolutely, I truly wouldn't have imagined that it would have that kind of effect once again. It's genuinely quite lovely and surprisingly delightful to see it presented in such a beautiful way.
As I mentioned earlier, we also have the sharpener in a classic black, which fits and complements perfectly. Certainly, we are actively investing significant effort and energy into this project right now, and it will absolutely be made available to you in the relatively not too distant future. However, it's actually quite intriguing because and I would say derived valuable insights from the initial series, particularly with the strategic approach of having the suitcases smartly organized and split across two distinct levels or sections. On top will be the knife and sheath, and on the lower level will be the lobby cards, the patch, and so on. It's going to look super stylish and really have that weapon-like vibe going on. But that's cool, right? Yeah.
That's absolutely totally cool. If I'm being entirely honest with you, I really wouldn't be able to think of that many examples right now.
Who actually do that. So we are extremely excited and looking forward to these two super special series that we will be able to present.
They will definitely look good. Yes, absolutely.
I'm definitely quite confident about that as well.
Black Beauty, the cherished and beloved classic tile.
Yes, exactly. That's one way to describe it.
That's always especially nice.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, that's just a brief note about the knives. And yes, do you have any other questions for me, Divi?
Yeah, that was really quite exciting. Yes. What I would still be very interested to know is whether you would consider making another knife for a Rambo movie again. I mean, Rambo 6 could just come out of the blue now. I have no idea what the title would be. Yes, precisely. Are you going to do it? Would you be involved again in that case?
Yeah, it's not exactly an easy question. You probably expected me to say, like, yeah, sure, of course, great, I'm in right away. Yeah.
I honestly would have thought the same, truly, when someone gets the opportunity. Then for Lars Blatt, this specific knife.
Yes. I have to share a bit of insight from my own personal experience there, which closely ties in with this comprehensive and substantial project, particularly the film project that we are actively engaged in. So, with a bit of distance and perspective, people might guess, man, it's really cool with the Pohl, standing there together with Snyder, doing those Rocky powers, everything being so awesome. And the cop is then happy to hear the cash register ring. If only it were that easy. Well, when you truly take a good and thorough look behind the glamorous scenes of Hollywood, you'll very quickly come to the realization that a lot of things only function there because of the involvement of numerous lawyers. Of course, there's significant pressure associated with it. There are agreements, contracts backing it up, which you As someone like myself, I mean, I am really a business professional for over 30 years. But when you get an English language contract, a sort of stranglehold contract laid in front of you, you naturally hesitate at first. And we thankfully truly had the amazing opportunity, thank God, with Rambo Last Blood. We still managed to pull off our thing, to put it bluntly, you might say. That was also closely connected to the fact that the entire project was very personal through Sly. And all these, let's put it as unpleasant moments, they only really surfaced afterwards when Hollywood came along and said, okay, we have this merchandising potential. How exactly are we going to market this now? And how do we get a substantial portion off here? And naturally, that's the moment when it all begins to lose its charm and become less pleasant.
Sure. Yes, it's indeed natural. Sure it is.
Well, I have to honestly say, with luck, achieving something remarkable like that, it really does get a bit dampened. I fully admit that honestly and without hesitation. But I'm certainly not exactly new or inexperienced when it comes to this industry or the broader business world. I am quite aware, of course, that everyone diligently tries to assert their own claims and also register their own demands right here, which is absolutely fine and justified without any question. However, the approach someone takes to engage and communicate with others ultimately influences and shapes the overall atmosphere and prevailing climate of collaboration. And that wasn't really nice, I have to say. Although I have to exclude the slider, it was always great. However, when you're in direct communication with Hollywood and the major Hollywood studios and what they actually believe they can demand, it is clearly not so easy. I'll admit that quite honestly. However, to circle back to your original question, I would probably go ahead and do it. But naturally, it depends on how everything plays out. So, if someone were to approach me and put a contract in front of me, one that I wouldn't understand at first glance, I would be very, very cautious. And under pressure, I wouldn't do it at all anymore.
Because it doesn't make a good impression from the other side either. No. Because I then already... No.
But honestly, people just don't care about that at all. I can tell you straight up. So, from the experiences I've had dealing with these people, I can honestly say it wasn't entirely positive, man. And yes, in essence, truly, in essence, as a good number of people are aware, the movie Rambo First Blood and the entire theme surrounding it have been immensely influential and incredibly life-shaping for me throughout so many decades. It naturally evolved into such a disappointment that really should simply never have been permitted to arise. However, well, it's something that's just part of life. Most likely, if someone made a sensible and reasonable approach towards me once more, and we managed to come to an agreement on a solid contractual foundation based on mutual respect, then I have no problem with it. I am very, very willing to do so and would be happy to, once again, contribute my creativity to this topic. But we just don't know. And now, at 78 years old, I hardly believe there will be another Rambo movie with Sylvester Stallone, at least. It kept coming up. I'm spoiling a bit from the inside now. Prior to it becoming clear that Sly would once again take on and embody the role of Rambros, I was consistently informed by the studios, with whom I actually had a very positive relationship, because I've been involved in other films too, including for the movie Hunter Killer and a variety of other projects.
Bring any nice ones again?
Yes, exactly. I did that as well. And of course, then I had also received the information that they were considering a reboot. So they truly intended to go with a different actor. Perhaps they wanted to restart the entire Rambo series from the very beginning. What I found truly striking was that I genuinely believed the entire concept was quite strong. Some time ago, I had even come up with several design concepts that were inspired by knives authentically used by the special forces during the Vietnam War. What's particularly interesting in this specific context is that the individual who played a role in the development of these knives was a gentleman known by the name of Conrad Ben Baker. And Conrad Ben Baker was responsible for the special forces during the Vietnam War who conducted cross-border operations, that is, behind enemy lines, have infiltrated enemy territory to perform reconnaissance and intelligence activities. That essentially means military units, for instance, conducting operations from Vietnam into Laos. And Laos was, in its core, considered quite neutral, supposedly maintaining neutrality, yet it naturally extended support to the Viet Cong. But all these operations, these cross-border operations, that is, behind enemy lines, there was this Conrad Ben Baker, who was the responsible leader in charge of all the equipment. He wasn't stationed in Vietnam, but was actually based in Japan, specifically in Okinawa. As he personally informed me, since I was familiar with him, he mentioned that he had been the one to develop these knives in those earlier days. The Conrad Ben Baker is no longer alive either, but what was quite funny was that I was able to talk to him as someone who was so deeply involved in the subject of special forces, even during the Vietnam War, was able to successfully persuade him in the early 2000s to write the introductory foreword for my very first book. Tactical utility knives are involved, hence it kind of comes full circle all over again. I would be happy, naturally.
Indeed, we're back once again to the circle that closes eventually.
And as I mentioned before, if a reboot ever came along, I'd absolutely find it exciting. I would absolutely have tons of fun being involved in it, but honestly, I truly have no idea if it will ever actually come to fruition. But if that ever became a real topic, I'd definitely enjoy it. But as I said, always with the condition that we work together as equals. And now don't simply turn into the studio's lackey and end up being taken advantage of in the process. Well, that's no fun. And to be honest, at the end of the day, I think I'm a bit too worthy to just let myself be used like that. Well, that just doesn't make any sense anymore, dude. Anyway. Yeah, Divi, I hope I was able to answer all your questions. And yes, our conversation ended up being a fair bit longer than what we had planned initially from the very start. You asked numerous great questions, and I was genuinely thrilled to answer them.
And an interesting word, yes.
Thank you so much. I'm definitely hoping so. So I've shared a bit more this time and really spilled the beans. And as I had already mentioned to you right at the very start when you initially approached me with your proposal, this particular kind of, I'll go ahead and call it a conversation. We're not really doing an interview. We're having a chat as friends. And exactly. It's just an incredible amount of fun, I have to honestly say. I had never done anything quite like that before. I've actually never very much, in that manner, kind of turned myself inside out to openly communicate what's truly on my mind or what the underlying backgrounds are behind numerous things. Therefore, it was an immense, immense pleasure to be here with you today and, of course, our cool outfit. Yes.
First of all, that.
What we have therefore now. And yes, truthfully, you just look incredibly stunning in the leaf sheaths. I must truly say that.
I feel comfortable too. I think it's really nice.
Honestly, I really think the Special Forces would be thrilled to warmly welcome you into their ranks, given your remarkable skills. No, not at all. So really, thank you very, very much for having me here and for bringing us together for this conversation.
It's important to mention that Rambo actually played a role in bringing us together.
Rambo brought us together, yes.
We became acquainted with each other thanks to my strong interest in this particular passion. That's correct, exactly.
By the end of the day, two Rambo nerds such as ourselves, in some way or another, managed to find each other. And yes, you really have to say that. And that's also what I keep saying, over and over, just to have a final sentence here. What I keep telling, even recently, when I visited Hope once more, I went back there quite recently, and the entire Rambo theme, along with everything associated with the Rambo knife, it's such an intriguing and captivating thing that it has almost immediately forged something very much akin to a brotherhood or sisterhood that is worldwide. And One of the most beautiful moments, I must honestly say, was when I sent the first knives also around the world and received so much feedback. Personal feedback arrived from individuals who are in my age group. And they would say, I share those same memories you also have. I'm sincerely grateful to you for tirelessly keeping the flame alive and continuously maintaining such a strong Rambo mindset, and graciously provides us with the opportunity to engage in your journey, which was indeed also mine. And thus, those are truly wonderful and memorable moments where one can actually say, okay, you not only brought joy by giving them something they can either display for their collection or actually use if he wants, but beyond that, it also allowed him, just like me, to take a bit of a time journey. So the journey back to a time where not everything was assuredly better, but which was truly undeniably and remarkably different, so much more carefree and relaxed that maybe not confronted with exactly the same challenges as we face today, but certainly with various other ones as well. But it was indeed a truly wonderful time. Having the ability to bring back so many outstanding and wonderful people gives me immense joy, and I'm really proud of that.
It's like a special gift for you too. Yeah, totally. That's why.
That's why. So here as well, that's why we have the legacy execution here too. It's not just a knife, but there are also these lobby cards included, which many people don't even know about anymore. In the past, it used to be like this in cinemas, that they would hang up movie posters and film photos to attract people, which all works online today. But that's how it was, and that's why we said, we'll design lobby cards similar to how they really were here 40 years ago. And they also show me at the different filming locations in Hope, or not just Hope, but also the Vancouver area. And people genuinely found it quite amazing that they got to experience these special moments from those filming locations. And well, that was really an additional benefit. How should I best put it? It was like an extra added value that I received that ended up coming back to me, since people were genuinely so pleased and excited about it. That's precisely why it continuously inspires me to keep pushing ahead and to remain deeply committed to the subject in every conceivable way. As you already know, I'm good friends with Sylvester Stallone personally, and he sincerely appreciates what I'm doing. And of course, that makes me especially happy to be, in a way, a kind of ambassador who keeps this idea alive. Also for the community, for the friends, with regard to the whole topic. Well, yes, a heartfelt thank you once again for listening so patiently to what I had to say.
Yes, of course. I'm just as thankful to you as well.
Yes, and I hope you all enjoyed it, had fun, and watched and listened with interest. And yes, it probably won't be the last meeting. There will surely be a continuation, and one that I'm already looking forward to. And yeah, I'll just say until then, I'll just say